Welcome to our webinar
Mhm.
on the value of labor management and cost to serve. My name is Lora Cecere, and I'm the founder of Supply Chain Insights, and I'll be your hostess or your guest today for this webinar will be Dan Keto. And Dan is the president and co-founder of Easy Metrics. And Easy Metrics is a innovator in the area of cost to serve in the warehouse. So Dan, if you want to move that slide forward, I'd like you to tell the group a little bit about yourself, and I'll tell the group a little bit about myself too, just so they know who they're having a discussion with. So, Dan, share a little bit.
Sure. Thank you, Laura. I appreciate this opportunity. My name is Dan Keto. I'm the co-founder and president of Easy Metrics. Easy Metrics was founded in 2013. It was spun out of a 4PL that my co-founder and I started back in the late 90s, running large cross-docking and logistic operations for various big retailers. Um, So we started off originally in labor management, but we noticed very quickly that often productivity gains may not translate directly into cost savings. And a lot of that was because of workflow mix and things like that. And so we developed a very comprehensive cost analytics application within the EasyMetrics platform that does cost to serve and activity-based costing. And since I've evolved that into a lot of other things, and we really are pushing it into a new category we're calling warehouse performance management because of all the different data sources coming online and the growing complexity of the warehouse operation. But really, cost to serve is such a fundamental component of distribution as far as understanding your business. And so I'm looking forward to today's interview and just really learning about the insights that Laura's investigation in cost to serve in the industry has provided.
Well, I appreciate your partnership on this study. This is a research study, and I'm followed by 340,000 people on LinkedIn, and I give thanks for everyone who takes my surveys. A little bit about me. I have spent 18 years in manufacturing distribution. My first warehouse that I led was when I was 28 years old, and I used to ship out of 22 doors. And then I went to build software for a while, and I've been an industry analyst for 28 years. And I love to help innovators drive value. And today in this research, we're going to talk about how do you drive value out of cost to serve. I first started studying cost to serve in 2001 when we first started implementing ERP and growing from regional to multinational to global supply chains and the evolution of e-commerce and the explosion of 3PLs. And I find that not a lot has really happened in the implementation of cost to serve. And you're going to see this in the data. So, Dan, let's get into the data and share a little bit about the results. Let's start with the demographics. You've always got to really process a research study by first saying, what is the population and what is the characteristics that are dominant in the population? So this study was fielded in the last 2 months, and it was focused on manufacturers, retailers, and 3PLs. The average company who answered this survey operated 26 warehouse operations, and 25% of the volume that was in the study was actually processed using a warehouse management system that had labor tracking and labor management, which was a lower percentage than I was hoping for. I was hoping that the adoption of labor management had been far more pervasive. Many were attempting to use cost to serve analysis, really looking at labor and customer centric information, particularly with the evolution of returns, but it only had 48% adoption. And most people are pretty immature in their understanding of cost to serve and their application of cost to serve for either business process optimization or the management of contracts, which is, I think, still an opportunity. Here I am 25 years later as an analyst, still hoping that we can drive an understanding of cost to serve. Most of the warehouses were dry or ambient, and most of the companies that were in the study were using SAP as the primary tool for warehouse automation. And I actually see in the data that those that are not linked to an ERP provider are further ahead in labor management and also cost to serve. I see in the data that it is typically the regional smaller players that are making bigger advancements in cost to serve, and those that have very large operations and are more tethered to an ERP centric warehouse management tool have not made as much progress. Outsourcing is a reality. 32% outsource more than 85% of their warehouse operations. And most of the data is primarily North American. We do have a little bit of European data, but e-commerce is a reality. And as we look at e-commerce and we look at the cycles and the shortening of the cycles and the importance of returns in e-commerce, cost to serve becomes an imperative. So Dan, what I'd like to do as I go through the results is have you give me your perspective on the
Hmm.
results. Sound okay?
Yep, sounds great.
Okay, so let's share what the data tells us. So let's look at the insights. So we asked companies to rate their top three levels of business pain. No surprise, the ability to get to data is at the top, and cross-functional alignment and increasing speed of business. Now, this answer, we ask people to rate their top three. So ability to use data, cross-functional alignment, increasing speed of business is a tie because those are really the top three business pains. Now, when I get into the data, the cross-functional alignment is really severe at the warehouse operations level. Most of the leaders managing warehouses do not see the alignment issue to the same degree that the people running the warehouses see it. But this increasing speed of business, particularly around volume and mix, is a big driver in labor management because it's unpredictable, and you're going to see the inability to forecast and understand that is really critical. But also, you're going to see that many times companies are dealing with a large latency of the data of sometimes 2 days to really manage operations. And so this contrast of increasing speed of business, along with the fact that it takes so many companies time to get to the data, is a big issue. So, Dan, how about your thoughts? When you look at this data, did this surprise you at all?
No, not really. This very much aligns with the challenges we see in the market. Labor management requires, some deep hookups into data. It's a highly transformed data set. And so when you're getting into being able to make very critical decisions, it's very difficult just to do that off of a WMS data set because it's non-transformed. And so getting access to that data, and now with all the other systems that are coming online in the warehouses, you need to bring all of those data sources together into one common story. That's a challenge. Just getting that data, going through the transformation process is another challenge. But as you see in line item 2 here on the cross-functional alignment, so often this work is done for specific silos of functionality. So the operations teams have a specific way they want to look at things, but there's a tremendous amount of value on the financial side. And, we're starting to see now the operations side looking more and more at cost to serve because when you're being asked to invest in automation, robotic systems, and so forth, you really have to understand what that potential ROI is. And you're not going to know that without really diving into that cost to serve. And then the final item, obviously, the increasing speed of business, omni-channel delivery, high customer demands, the tariff fiasco we went through, this year, as well as COVID challenges. It's really created lots of dynamic exogenous factors that impact businesses. And without really good real-time data, it's very difficult to respond effectively to those surges of demand and changes in workflow. So this really does align with the challenges we're seeing in the marketplace right now.
Okay, well, let's continue because we got a lot to go through. So,
Mhm.
when we ask people to give us the descriptors of how do they feel about their workplace, are they agile? Are they informed? Are they proactive? Are they controlled? Are they customer centric? Do they get the data when they need it to make the answers? Are they responsive? And do they feel like their operations are working well? We actually find a correlation at an 80% level on improving agility, proactivity, and customer centricity. when companies rate themselves as mature and cost to serve. And this includes building this labor management platform on top of warehouse management and the alignment of the leaders of distribution with the actual operations of what is happening in the warehouse. Now, we will be publishing a report out of this data that will be in about 2 weeks from now. So, if you want to have a good discussion with your warehouse leader or your head of supply chain about either alignment or implementation of cost to serve, this would be a great way to have that discussion. But Dan, why do you think it's so hard for people to drive this kind of understanding of cost to serve? Because I've been studying it for 22 years and it's not really being adopted very well.
I think when labor management first came into the market, the way it was approached was a very large engineered lift, and so often these implementations would take a year-long process. And now we're seeing how dynamic distribution is becoming. Change is constant. To bring that change through, you continually having to reconfigure, in a sense, your data model. The newer, more cloud-based applications are far more agile in that environment and gives you that ability to adapt. So the companies that have embraced, labor management and a data-driven strategy, it makes perfect sense to me why they have that ability to be agile and informed. Because they are able to change their business processes and models to the changing dynamics. Where going back to like a lot of the groups in the survey with these big enterprise plays, those systems just are not as dynamic by their nature, and it makes it difficult to adapt to the changing environment.
And I think that many business leaders are just not aware of how dynamic, particularly mix and volume changes are. And so, the need to not to necessarily have real-time data, but data at the speed of business of which you make decisions is really critical in driving that business process optimization. So let's move on with our data. So we want to be more agile, we want to be more customer centric, and we want to be able to move at the speed of business. Now, only 50-60% of warehouse data is visible with a 1 to 2 day lag. So many of our warehouse operations are actually operating in the dark for 1 to 2 days with data around labor and mix not really visible, which this kind of surprised me, Dan, that, it's 2025, we've got a lot of effort that have gone into warehouse management, but this kind of lag on getting data out of operations has got to be a killer.
Oh, absolutely. I can't even imagine trying to run an operation without near real-time data. We were running operations back in the 2000s and we were manually tracking everything, but we had full visibility because things change constantly. One of the terms I always would, make my hair stand up is like, oh, a box is a box. It's like, no, it's not. Try unloading swimming pools for Walmart versus tennis shoes. Two very different boxes have two very different workflows and labor requirements. And so that visibility is absolutely critical. And so it is kind of surprising to me how delayed this information flow in there. But that goes back to the survey results. Only 25% have labor management. So that means the other groups are tracking on spreadsheets, using time clocks, or just using hopefully very adept supervisors to try to monitor things.
But let's look at returns and damage. And I know, Dan, you've got a great story
Mhm.
of a shoe manufacturer and returns. But imagine that you're not seeing the data for returns, 1 to 2 day lag, and the drag on profitability. Why don't you share your story?
Yeah, it's an interesting concept. This really rolls into cost to serve and how that information should be matriculated through the entire organization. So we have a customer that does a lot of e-commerce and shoes, and the average user will buy 3 pairs of shoes, 3 different
That's
sizes,
me.
because you got
Yeah.
it, because how the sizes are varied, so they try all three on and they ship the other two back. There's way more cost in the supply chain with the movement of those shoes than the actual shoe. You can buy the shoes out of China for $5 produced, ship, drop to your door at the warehouse, but then you've got the shipping costs and then the return costs. You have to inspect them, you got to repackage them, put them back on the shelves. So you might have $50 of logistics costs to get that successful pair of shoes to that consumer, and only $5 into that shoe. And the mindset has always been focused on kind of that manufacturing supply chain. But when you look at that holistic cost, you have to bring that pricing information through the organization. Otherwise, you're going to lose your shirt in trying to adapt to this new omni-channel market that we're in.
Yeah, the return level for customer serve is, and cost to serve is so critical. And
Mm-hmm.
the latency of that data, I think, is really key in this survey. Next slide. Okay, let's continue. Okay, the other thing is, do people trust the data? The trust is much higher at a 90% confidence level for people that have labor management. But if you look at all the activities that are happening in the warehouse, you can see that the trust level is not necessarily that high. Dan, your thoughts here?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's obvious to me why labor management would have a higher trust because there's so much scrutiny on the data itself because you often will have to make hire and fire decisions or promotion and fire decisions on that. A lot of companies will do pay for performance. So when you're doing a model like that, your data has to be as accurate as possible. Outside of that, it's a different game, and so I can see why that is the case. Now, across different areas, there's going to be a variance because that comes down to the sophistication of the data collection. Picking is done by the WMS. It's on the scan guns. You generally have extremely accurate picking information. Other processes like damage and returns, it may not be as systematized. So now you're dealing with more manually tracked systems, more subjective data. That's going to cause, I guess, less trust in the information because it's not systemically created.
Well, I think one of the really important pieces of labor management as it ties to cost to serve is consistent definitions as it ties to business process optimization.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to get into that in a minute because, a warehouse is not a warehouse, a case is not a case, and people don't always define these activities the same way as we work in the management of operations. So let's continue with our slides here. Now, look at the importance. This data is really important to both leaders and also people that run the warehouse, but we're not able to get it at the speed at which people need to make a decision without the implementation of labor management. And, the information across the board is just really important. Anything to say here, Dan?
No, this really confirms our belief in the system. It's just data is eating the world. It's changing the way we do things, and managers now want to be highly informed. No longer do we have a manager that's been there for 20 years that just knows everything intuitively. We have a very dynamic turnover in the warehousing space of people. You have to institutionalize that information with data, and you have to make it as real time as possible. So yeah, this confirms everything we've been seeing.
Well, one of the issues is it's really important, but you got to do something with it. And if you're not aligned on the importance of customers and customer centricity as it ties to business process operations, you can't really make it actionable. And so that's important, particularly as we look at returns and damage and we look at changes in mix to be able to drive that business process optimization. Next slide. And so let's look at cost to serve, right? The top three opportunities are really, let's drive process improvement. Let's look at ongoing profitability analysis. Let's look at management of complex operations. The warehouse is much more complex now with personalization and fulfillment than when I used to run a warehouse. But tying it to this process optimization with that alignment is tough because the speed of business has increased and it's more complex. So we've got more issues with returns and mix, and many of those are not well understood. So, Dan, what steps can people take to really drive that process optimization?
So with process optimization and cost to serve, the key is to take the cost to serve down to a more micro level because cost to serve is really, it's a high level term. We take it into activity based costing. And I'm very excited about the response on this report because That shows me that customers now or companies are seeing the value of understanding what it costs to do things. 10 years ago, that was not the case. They weren't really as focused on that. They were looking more at the overall cost out of the facility. You really do need to take it down to the process level by customer, by product type, because that bifurcation of data will give you those insights. And then as you're investing in automation or process engineering, you can then see very quickly, did this improve decrease my cost to serve or increase my cost to serve? You need to have that visibility because otherwise you're kind of guessing a lot of times on your process changes.
And the warehouse leaders need to be talking to the warehouse leadership team about how do they drive these processes and how do they make customer decisions on that cost to serve. It's one thing to get the data, it's another thing to make those hard decisions. Next slide. And so, demand variability, we're in a world of turbulence, right? With, changing customer sentiment, affordability issues, changing product mix. And we find that there's a big gap between those that run warehouses and those that run leadership teams and understanding the
Mhm.
speed of business, the alignment issues, the mix issues, and the demand volatility. When I first wrote this study, I thought labor turnover was going to be the number one issue. But I was surprised to see that it's really around this alignment issue and mix and variability, which is only increasing. Dan, your thoughts?
I absolutely agree here. The paradigm in the industry for the longest time was, what's my units per hour? The variability of that is all over the place. Just going back to our cross-docking experience, offloading barbecues and swimming pools, we're running 15 cases, 20 cases an hour. Doing tennis shoes, we can run 300 or 400 cases an hour offloading. So a box isn't a box. So that workflow variability now, you need the detail in the data to support it, but that tells the story. The challenge you have is on the finance side. They tend to like to look at things on a macro level across all their facilities, but the story is in the data underneath. So I can see why the operations managers are really bringing this up because that's the challenge they're having in bridging that communication with finance because finance has a million things they're looking at. So they just want a single number to look at every facility. And that doesn't work because of that variability. Our most sophisticated customers daily look at the data and then they call out in the data the workflow variability that affects some of those key measurements that they're holding their facilities accountable to.
Okay, so Dan, let's keep going. And so if we look at the maturity, there's only 4% that feel like they're mature, and they are typically smaller companies. We've got, the large companies, particularly those that have worked on, one throat to choke, going to have common systems are really struggling, but it's those small regional suppliers that are more customer centric that have moved faster on, cost to serve. And, why do you think it's taken so long and, people aren't, adopting it more readily?
I think it comes down to being able to construct a unified data model. If you're a smaller organization, you may have one or two facilities, you control all the data. When you look at these large companies, one of our customers has 15 different WMSs in their network. Then we have all sorts of different automation. We have all these other things coming in there. And to bring that all together into one story is a big challenge. And then going back to what we talked about earlier, aligning to stakeholders and so forth. So I think it is just the the legacy nature of so many of the systems we have in there. Some of these companies can't even get access to the data they need to build the cost to serve models because of
Right.
they're still running on AS 400s. So there's a maturity of the underlying data platforms, but then there's also just making this a priority. And warehousing distribution is becoming such a critical cost factor and customer touch factor. I think we're going to see tremendous change over the next decade as companies are trying to evolve up this maturity curve here.
So, Dan, one of the topics and hurdles you faced building
Mhm.
easy metrics was that unified data model for cost to serve. How tough was that?
It's taken a long time.
So
Yeah,
how
it's a
long
challenge.
is it taking you?
Well, we started this in 2000. We originally we spun out Easy Metrics in 2013, but we started in 2011. Fortunately, we started in labor management because that is the core. I mean, that's 70% of your cost for a non-automated facility. Now we're bringing in other data sources. Now you have automation mixed in with the labor. Well, getting access to that data, poses a new set of challenges, and that the costing factor on those work differently because you're leasing the equipment. It's not an hourly variable cost like you have in the labor. So it is a big challenge, but I think we are by far the leading group in the marketplace on this because we run everything at the transaction level for performance. It's not that difficult to append cost and revenue at that transaction level as well to give that granular visibility companies are looking for. But it is a challenge, and it's getting data, working with the stakeholders to align the data, again, getting everybody in the room together. That is always organizationally tricky.
Well, 78% of this population is immature or maturing. And
Yeah.
many times people say, oh, let's just go do cost to serve. But I think they don't realize how hard it is to get clarity of definitions and how hard it is to build that unified data model. And particularly because we have such a random kind of set of inputs, whether it's 3PLs or, automation. So, kudos to you and your team. It's hard. And,
It
there's
is.
been a lot more talk around cost to serve than implementation. This data has not moved since I first did the
Mm.
study in 2000. We're not making any progress, which I think is sad because, we have a lot more pressure in the warehouse around mix and variability and returns and e-commerce. And the order cycle has gotten faster. So getting that alignment is really key. Okay, let's continue. So we're not very mature, but one of the things people think is, okay, let me just slap AI on top of existing warehouse management and life will be better. And that is not the answer because we have to have that unified data model, those clear definitions, that business process alignment. But AI does offer us the opportunity for proactive alerting once we have cause to serve and looking at root cause analysis and improving interoperability. What are you seeing in the world of AI and adoption in this area? We can't just put AI on top of warehouse management without that unified data model and the hard work around definitions and alignment. But what are you seeing here, Dan?
So I see AI with single data sources can be pretty effective. But going back to the foundation of the unified data model, you have to bring a lot of different data sources together and you've got to transform them. Once you put that layer in place, then layering AI on top can unlock the magic. The challenge we have is companies haven't gone through that unified data model process. So there's a huge push beginning of this year. Everyone's got to do AI. I mean, it seems like the financial committees of all the big companies said, "Hey, AI's got to be part of your core strategy." So everyone piled into it, but they didn't realize that there's a certain foundation first. And when you start looking at the cost of running these AI data models on a non-unified data model, it can be $100,000 a month. I mean, it's crazy how expensive it gets. And so you have to go through this process of aligning stakeholders, finding all the key KPIs, finding all the data sources, and bringing that together. You have to cost optimize it. You have to performance optimize it. Once you do that, then you can layer in AI, machine learning, and unlock that magic. But that process of getting that unified data model in place because you have to bring so many different stakeholders in, it takes time. And I think companies, what we're seeing are they are pulling back and saying, okay, let's get those foundational layers done first. And our industry requires ROI. It is so focused on capturing every one of those little pennies. They're not going to just throw millions and millions into something if they're not going to get a return on it. And so we've seen kind of a step back and say let's be a little smarter about this. And that's really the same approach we've taken with AI. We think it's going to change the world, but we're taking a very thoughtful approach on it because we see how quickly the cost can spin out of control and not get the ROI on it. So we're really focusing on ROI driven initiatives.
But AI is not the easy button, right? It's, you got to do
No.
the hard work of the definition and the alignment and, let's don't AI stupid of thinking I can just put a large language model on top of warehouse management and suddenly it's going to tell me
Yeah.
cost to serve, right? It requires really building that unified data model, driving that alignment, tying it to business process automation, and then I think we can get this value. So let's continue with the research results. So people see artificial intelligence as important. I wish that they saw cost to serve as important as they see artificial intelligence, right? It's just very interesting to me that, I've been studying cost to serve for 25 years and we're not making much progress, but people want to dance with shiny objects and go after AI. And I just think let's be careful that we don't jump into the hype cycle and spend money that's not going to give us value without really doing the hard work. Your thoughts,
I,
Dan?
it's the same thing with automation. So many companies have raced into automation without really understanding the cost and performance impacts, because costs go way beyond just, you can save in one area, but it causes a spillover in other areas. And
Right.
so I see the same thing with AI. I think I think we've kind of moved into the trial of disillusionment now in AI. And so this has got to be rationalized. These changes do not happen in a year or two. These changes take time. And everyone realizes they need to have a strategic initiative behind AI, but I'm seeing them really be more thoughtful about it. We've rolled out some new AI products. We're getting, companies now saying, well, we need to have a complete security review on how this AI is going to be used. Where is it being trained, the data? So you got to go through legal, you got to go through IT. So the regulatory environment is quickly catching up with what AI has done. And so organizations are starting to become much more thoughtful on it. So it is a strategic initiative, but I don't think it's going to move as fast as the Wall Street likes to think it is.
Well, and I think cost to serve is a wonderful opportunity for us to put AI to work. Next slide.
Absolutely, that's the ultimate measurement.
Yeah, so let's continue here. So let's wrap up, right? So the results of this study will be available in a report in 2 weeks. And if you actually took the study and participated, I want to say thank you from my heart. I love the fact that I can use my LinkedIn database and drive the responses. If you took the study, you'll be invited to a roundtable where other warehouse leaders will talk about how do we build this process automation and drive alignment. Alignment is one of the biggest issues underlying, I think, the slow adoption of cost to serve. And that's particularly relevant as we face uncertainty, right? Those 1 to 2 day latency in getting the data in most of our operations has got to be tough, particularly with what's happening around changes in mix, changes in volume, and some of the issues around damage and return. Improving labor tracking is fundamental and having that unified data model. But, we have 48% adoption, which we're not moving that needle very far. And most people are very immature, and it's only the regional supply chains,
Mm.
those that are in process and retail, that have made the most improvement. But I think the first step is getting labor management in, getting that unified data model agreed to, and driving agreement on objectives. So, Dan, what are the top 3 things you would tell people to go do out of this webinar?
Bring all the stakeholders in the room. That's the number one thing. I mean, anyone who is, affected by the warehousing distribution operations, you need to bring all those players together as you then are launching forward on that unified data model. Uh, we've seen some really painful failures where groups are optimizing to just a pure operational basis without the cost to serve. Then the CFO is like, well, we want cost to serve. Well, then you have to shred your data model and start over again. So you need to have all the key players in there when you start an initiative like this, because you're building the foundation for the house. And that sort of group stakeholder alignment is absolutely critical. And then again, find a platform. You can try to do this yourself. We've never seen anyone successful. We've had so many companies that said, "Oh, we'll just do it ourselves," and they come back 4 years later and say, "Well, we spent $20 million, and now we want to talk to you." So if you can do it, great. But it is we've got 20 years of pain and suffering to that we learned to get here. So I recommend reaching out to a good provider, preferably us if you can, to look at this endeavor.
Well, Dan, we're out of time. And I appreciate
Mm,
your support of this. And I hope
yeah.
that people will read the survey and drive alignment. We have a couple of questions, so let's just take a minute and
Sure.
think about the questions. You talked about stakeholders. If you were going to invite people around the table to read this report, who would you call?
I would bring in the executive, like this, supply chain executive team. Like in this survey, we had the average group had 26 facilities. So you've got groups that are overseeing all those facilities. So you want that executive view on things, or what are the key measurements that they're looking across their network. Finance is critical. Cost is everything now. Everyone's focused more on bottom line growth versus top line growth due to the interest rate environment. So bringing finance in and understanding that how they want to see the business is imperative. And then operations. Those three groups are critical. The operations side, then you have engineering and so forth. That gives you the business case of what you want to do. Then you bring in your IT and those groups because then they can engineer to that business case. So that would
Well,
be, go ahead.
I'd
Mhm.
also consider sales and maybe marketing, particularly as it ties to returns. I think
Yeah.
most people don't understand the cost of returns, and it's kind of that hidden cost in the warehouse. I have a question.
Mhm.
How long does it take to implement cost to serve?
Surprisingly, the way we've set the model up, we can get it in place in about 4 weeks for a client at a facility level. And what some of our bigger groups, we've rolled out 20, 30 facilities in 4 or 5 months. What we usually do is we'll start with a small group of facilities to really get everything optimized, and then you can, basically copy paste it across the whole network. Now, that's not going to be a full engineered labor standard model because that requires another layer of depth. But from a cost to serve perspective, grabbing that transactional data from the WMS and the time clock systems, those can be brought together pretty quickly to give them that cost to serve visibility at that transaction level that they're looking for.
So, what's the biggest challenge? Why are people not doing it?
I think it's just awareness. Cost to serve historically has not been part of the labor management data set. And so when people look at historically what labor management is, they would say, oh, it's a huge lift, there's change management, it's a big endeavor. If you don't have the organization behind it, it can struggle. All these new technologies now are making it much faster, making it much more user friendly. We built from the foundation that cost to serve capability in there, but I think it's just a lack of understanding that's available. Because historically, in your older LM systems, it was all focused on engineered labor standards. But for us, it's like that cost per transaction, that activity-based costing is where the magic is. And so we've really pushed our business model into the more financial side of things, understanding that operations is critical, but that financial communication is imperative for businesses. And that's why Amazon is, in a sense, eating the world. They have that sort of sophistication from a cost perspective, and they're able to sit there and adapt, real time to the changes in the marketplace.
Well, our time's up. So let's
No, great.
close for today. And I appreciate everyone that answered the survey. And I hope that you have great success in implementing cost to serve and driving alignment. I think the first question is, what do we want to deliver to our customers and why? And how do we get that data to be able to drive
Mhm.
reliability in warehouse operations in a way that balances cost to serve, customer profitability, and our order fulfillment reliability? Dan, thank you so much.
Laura, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.